Thank you and good evening. My name is Sam Long. I'm the Community Outreach Manager for Autism Tennessee. Thank you all for coming out this evening for our Parent Perspectives panel, an event that is part of the Autistic Life and Culture Project, graciously funded by the Humanities Tennessee grant. Their support helped us to ensure that these education events through 2025 are available at no charge to our community, so we're very grateful and excited about the events we have planned for you in 2025. The purpose of these panels is to create an affirming space for parents and others to share their unique experience as caregivers to autistic people. We believe bringing these support networks together is an act of community care as we all journey through a world designed with neurodivergent families in mind. Before we dive in this evening, we want to remind you that this is a body-mind friendly space. Feel free to stim, stand up, fidget, doodle, move your body in any movement that works for you. For those of us at the in-person location, we do have sensory items available at our outreach table for our attendees to use if needed. We appreciate you spending your Thursday evening with us as we dive into the very important topic of self-care for caregivers, parents, guardians, and others, especially this time of year. This topic is vital, so we hope that you take what is helpful with you in this space as you move into the holiday season. Our panelists this evening will discuss strategies for connecting with other parents, professional and community resources to cultivate a strong circle of support. They will offer tips and insights for how to harmonize self-care with family caregiving. We'll now introduce our moderator and panelists and then move into our panel discussion. We'll save about 20 minutes or so towards the end for questions from the audience. So if you think of something that wasn't included in our list of questions tonight, please feel free to address our panelists at that time and drop your questions in the chat for those of us on Zoom. So with that, I will step aside and introduce our panelists and lovely moderator. All right, so to my left, we have the lovely moderator and board member, Babs Tierno. Thank you for joining us. Babs works for the Tennessee Department of Disability and Aging, DDA. In her role, she focuses on Tennessee Strong Families, which is a collaboration between DDA and DCS. Ms. Tierno has bachelor's degrees in psychology, sociology, criminal justice, and interdisciplinary legal studies from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and her master's degree in education from Middle Tennessee State University. Ms. Tierno serves on the board of directors and has two sons, ages 14 and 9. Both boys are on the autism spectrum. Welcome, Babs. All right, well, welcome in our panelists, starting with our Zoom panelist, Dr. Dave Caudell. Hello, welcome, Dave. We'd love to extend a special thanks to Dr. Dave as he is an advisor on the Autistic Life and Culture Project. So thank you very much. We're so thankful for your support in this time. Dr. Dave Caudell is the Associate Director of the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome in 2009, Caudell is a neurodivergence advocate speaking to a variety of organizations, including the UN and autism conferences internationally. For much of his life, he struggled to find his place in the world and has had a number of careers, including videographer, soldier in the U.S. Army, photojournalist, magazine editor, public affairs specialist, truck salesman, and corporate stints from customer service to loss prevention, just to name a few. He received his PhD in physics at Vanderbilt University in 2017 and is passionate about meaningful employment for adults on the spectrum by finding novel, innovative ways to measure their strengths, talents, and passions, then match those to specialized business needs. Welcome, Dr. Dave.
Thank you.
Next, we have Alicia Talbot. She is the Executive Director of DSAMT. After spending several years as an active member and volunteer in our organization and in the disability community. She received her BA and MA from Western Kentucky University, taught at Nashville State and Volunteer State Community Colleges, directed marketing at Passport Health Communications, Inc., and was a freelance marketing professional before joining DSAMT. She has served on the Disability Coalition for Education, Vanderbilt's Disability Pathfinder Advisory Committee, the Tennessee Disability Coalition Board of Directors, David County Mayor's Advisory Committee for People with Disabilities, the Wilson County Family Support Advisory Board, and currently is on the board at the Tennessee Disability Coalition and Down Syndrome Affiliates in Action. She is a strong advocate for inclusion and acceptance for those with Down syndrome and other disabilities in the community and schools. Her passion lies in helping those with Down syndrome show the world that those with something extra bring extraordinary gifts to our communities, which should be recognized and valued. Welcome, Alicia. Thank you for joining us today. Next is Lisa Hammett. Lisa has navigated the known/diagnosed autism journey for 27 years since her soon-to-be 30-year-old daughter was diagnosed at age 3. She did all the recommended therapies and services recommended for her daughter, who also has an intellectual disability and limited conversational skills. When her daughter, Grace Goad, was 4, Lisa branched out into arts therapies and discovered her daughter's visual art ability, which has been featured nationally and internationally in various books, media, books, and exhibitions. Grace's school years in Metro Nashville were a combination of inclusion and special education classroom supports. Grace continues to paint, works part-time at TJ Maxx with a job coach for 7+ years, and enjoys her single mother's many hard-earned supports through the ECF Choices Medicaid waiver program. Thank you very much. Welcome, Lisa. All right, and lastly, we have Darren Johnson. Welcome, Darren. Darren is a clinically trained healthcare chaplain, advocates for equity and flourishing across multiple communities. She is a co-chair of the Davidson County Committee of the Tennessee Equality Project and serves on the community advisory boards for the Vanderbilt Community Center. Is the immediate past chair of the Program for LGBTQ+ Health at VUMC. Is the chair of the Equity Advisory Council for Bright Spring Health, and for 16+ years, the IRB for the VA Health System serving Middle Tennessee. Chaplain Johnson recently joined the Advisory Subcommittee for SACHRP, the Federal Department of Health and Human Services Secretary's Advisory Committee on Human Research Protections, and was elected by Nashville and Davidson County's Metro Council to serve on its Human Relations Commission. Most importantly, Darren's a proud parent of Rowan, a lovely, loving, and lovable autistic young man, and the spouse of Kate, a creative, sharp woman who lives with MS. Thank you to all of our panelists for being here and to Babs for moderating this discussion. We'll move on into our questions in just a moment.
Okay. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I've never used a microphone like this. Okay, thanks, Dave. All right, Dave, you on my list, you're first. So I'm gonna let you tackle the first question, and then everybody else, if you want to take a turn after that, you're welcome to. So what are some of the misconceptions about self-care in caregiving that you would like to address? And I'll let Dave, if you want to tackle this one.
Misconceptions, and to repeat that.
Misconceptions about self-care in caregiving that you'd like to address.
Misconceptions in self-care for caregivers. That's going to be a tough one for me to answer because I didn't get into that. Yeah, let's I'm having a bit of cognitive difficulties right now, which is making it a little bit difficult to process. Why don't we let some of our other folks talk first, and then I'll add to that.
Will do. All right. Would you like to tackle it? Okay.
I think there's a really negative expectation or low expectation for self-care around, I find in my experience for parents of children with disabilities, children and adults, is that you just can't and that you just don't. The automatic, I found the automatic assumption is that you don't practice self-care. And, you know, that doesn't have to be the case. And it's probably a perception because that's a stereotype out there. Stereotypes exist because there's truth in them, but the problem is assigning that perception to everyone in that situation. So I think sometimes it also comes with pity, you know, and also like, well, I won't invite you to this because you probably don't have time, or, you know, just assumptions.
So I would agree with all of that. I think one important sort of misperception is that, you know, as a caregiver, that it's just sort of easy to get help. that everybody, because you're raising a child who has special needs, that everybody's always asking you what you need, and that you are of sound body and mind to say, this is what I need today. I think it's really hard to give someone who's offering help, to give them that opportunity to really help you. And at least in my case, getting self-care, you know, and having respite was almost impossible for many years. My children were not easy for someone else to be able to take care of them. I couldn't just hire the kid down the street to sit with my kid for an hour or two. And even when I got an hour or two, that's really not enough. That's not really self-care, right? I mean, it's a long, very involved process. So I think those are, for me, the biggest misperceptions. You got something?
Affirm that. I think it's the primary instinct that I have, right? That I see this in a lot of different spaces where folks come by the side of you in one, you know, literally or figuratively, and say, you know, you really need to look out for you, right? And you're like, great, thanks. If it were only that easy, right? If I know that I've caught myself many times, right, saying to folks, remember, you know, the old airplane metaphor of, you know, making sure that you put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on the folks around you. But if things are so chaotic that you can't even like figure out where the oxygen mask is hanging, right? And if the care needs are high, that advice, to your point, only goes so far. Even basic things there, if you have a child or a person that has anxiety around non-familiar folks, like even doing something as basic as arranging the drive to and from a doctor's appointment or to school or wherever it happens to be, all of a sudden becomes a lot more complicated, right? People will go, oh, just make sure they get an Uber or, you know, something like that. And you're like, yeah. And how exactly is that gonna work? So I think that when it comes to just to reinforce your good point that yes, it's absolutely needed. Yes, we absolutely should be getting it. And no, a lot of times it's hard to put in place to get those moments for ourselves.
Thank you so much to my fellow panelists. I now feel like I understand what the question that was being asked. Sorry about that. So yeah, one of the reasons I initially kind of struggled with it is that you know, I grew up in the working class, and we didn't have access to like experts and people and professionals and stuff that could kind of help. And I was raising my 3 kids as a single dad in a basically working class. You know, it wasn't until I got my PhD and got up in the middle class that I had access to help and being able to. So I was used to trying to figure out everything for myself and trying to do everything by myself. But I would say some misconceptions that I've seen, because I do talk to a lot of parents that are reaching out for tips or advice. I'd say one of the misconceptions, there's no just one standard way to raise your child or deal with like those special needs and stuff. You know, all 3 of my kids are on the autism spectrum. I had to relearn how to be a parent with each and every one of them, because aspects of their autism were different from one another, and one needed a particular style to really help them like learn how to grow up and become an independent adult, and that style did not work at all for the other 2. So I had to like relearn on all of them. So I'd say that's a misconception. You know, you almost have to be kind of like a scientist and just kind of get to know the child and try a variety of different things and figure out what works and what doesn't, and just sort of like build your knowledge of best practices from there. So nobody can really tell you what the best practices are for your child. So that might be a misconception. Another misconception that's kind of fueled by a lot of times, as parents, when we do have our kids and we go to experts to try to help us, we find that maybe that expert knows a lot less about autism than we do and doesn't really know how to properly help this person. They're trying to use like neuro majority ways of doing things with our children that aren't necessarily going to work. That can be kind of frustrating and kind of feel like we're the smartest person in the room when in reality that person should be like that person is the expert, so they're supposed to. So sometimes we kind of feel like we're kind of by ourselves in this. This is one of the things I love about Autism Tennessee and peer support groups and stuff is that you're not alone and you don't have to figure all this stuff out yourself. There are other parents who are going through the same thing that you're going through, or they've gone through the same sort of thing that you're going through. So finding some of those support groups, a mother support group, a father support group, to kind of get with your peers, other people who are dealing, and just kind of share and sort of connect and get some tips or advice. And sometimes we just need some encouragement or just being told like, you're not doing as bad of a job as you might think you are. Like, yeah, this is a really difficult thing you're trying to do, but maybe you're not celebrating your victories enough. Maybe you're not, looking at the silver lining enough. Those are things that we could really be helping each other out. So you're not alone, and there's no standard way of doing things. Those are the two big misconceptions that I often see.
Thank you. I felt like a theme through all of that was that the mental load never stops, even whenever you do get that downtime. Just feels like it is always a weight. Okay, what are some self-care practices that you found helpful in the early stages of your journey, and how did you make time for them amidst the demands of supporting your loved one? Dave, do you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah. So the first I already kind of clued into. My first child, it didn't take as long to figure out the right way to raise her, and she was a very easy child to kind of raise because she was such a people pleaser that she would bend over backwards to make sure she's following the rules and do everything. Like in a lot of ways, it made our job as parenting kind of easy. Um, and then when I had my next one, I discovered, oh no, I can't just use a one size fits all. I'm gonna have to start over from scratch and figure out. It took me like 2 or 3 years to figure that out, but the evidence was kind of overwhelming. So my third one, I was a little bit more kind of prepared for that. So when neither of those strategies worked for her, I was at least like, okay, I've gone around this bend a couple of times now. Let me just try to figure out what works best for you, and we'll kind of go with that. It was a lifelong. Like I don't feel like I became a good parent for my kids and served all my roles and responsibilities as a father until my kids were darn near grown up. Like I don't feel like I really got them on lockdown until they were practically legal adults. It took me that long just to kind of like dial in on how to guide them, how to support them, um, how to teach them agency and stuff. It took me that long, and until I got good at it, I was like torturing myself a lot over the mistakes I made, especially, you're trying something that's a best practice, and then later on you realize, oh, because of their sensory issues, this is actually the worst thing I could do, and I've been traumatizing my child. Let me throw that out and do something different. And then you feel awful about all the times you can remember before you learned that. That's another thing too. Like you're going to grow and evolve. And as you do and you come to a new understanding, if you feel a little bit of guilt or stress over realizing that you've been doing things wrong in the past, don't beat yourself up too much about that. Like you did that because you didn't know. Now you know. Now you have a pathway forward that you can do better. Celebrate the fact that you've learned that about that and you can better serve this child. I think that's what we should be doing, like learning from our past, but not torturing ourselves too much because it is a very stressful thing to kind of deal with all of that stuff and try to keep your sanity together. So you got to give yourself some grace in that and remember that you are doing the best you can with what you have. And it's going to get better. You just got to keep working at it.
Perfect. Alicia?
Sure. This one's easy for me. Self-care practices that I found helpful in the early stages of the journey, absolutely none. I had double pneumonia and bronchitis and was taking my son to his fine motor therapy sessions. I was oblivious. I was the mom who had all of the goals on the refrigerator during early intervention. There just was no self-care, and I didn't realize how important that was until much further down the road. And I think it became is something that I had to just say to myself, stop. I remember the very first time another parent said to me, it's okay if you miss therapy. You need to cancel therapy. And he was probably, we started about 11 months. He was probably almost 3 before we missed any therapy sessions. And for my son, that was feeding therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. That's a lot in addition to doctor visits, et cetera. So I remember very guiltily calling and saying, we can't come tomorrow. and and the weight that was lifted, and it just felt amazing. And so that sort of started that, okay, sometimes I can't live my life around this diagnosis, and I'm important in this equation too.
Hmm.
Well, I've asked myself, in leading up to this, did I realize what I signed up for to talk about self-care tonight? People who know me know that I am really good at that, or at least I used to be. And so I can answer the self-care practices that I found helpful. And, but I'm also looking back to that time when I had some foundational supports. And by nature, I have been a very resilient person and a very, mentally healthy person. Even though I went through a divorce when my child was 8 or 10, I still had financial supports. I still had a co-parent, but I just found, I discovered he helped me prioritize from the beginning of after my daughter was born, self-care and the need to take care of me in order to take care of her, to feel that well. But I'm at a stage at 64 going on 65 where, as I was talking to an wise elder friend of mine last night, I'm in that final third of my life. And a lot of, the easier times were when she was in school, where I did send her off and I did have this time. Sure, I was planning, I was doing all kinds of things that were to her benefit and the community benefit. But I have found that being out of school and being in adult services with her level of functioning is just, it's flattened me. I had an entire 10 months of last year where there were 3 of her many services through TennCare, because we've maxed out. In other words, we have taken advantage of everything that she needs. I haven't gotten an OT yet, and she has one available afternoon where we can fit it in. But, I supervise employees. She's got 2 caregivers. She's got job coaches. She functions at a level where she'll always need that job coach to do that job. I mean, she's living a good life, but like yesterday, at the end of the day, I wrote down all I did. And I'm an administrative assistant and I'm a creative. I'm an artist and a writer. And, I've gone back into therapy. I burned out. I even had a friend of mine who's a psychologist that said you had a systems burnout. And so I'm trying to come back to those self-care practices because I now have compassion for the people who have experienced depression or chronic depression, and how hard it is to raise yourself up and do these things that take care of you, but they are fundamental. And so connecting with nature, walking in the woods, getting out, getting sunshine. I'm trying to get myself out at 7 o'clock, get that sunlight into my eyes in the morning. I do meditate. I do some yoga, 5 minutes, but that's fine. It's a little of something. I, believe it or not, just only recently signed up for Netflix. And, for right now, that's joyous to me to watch, Emily in Paris or, some series like that. But, I'm trying to bring back those things. And so I'm in a healing state right now. And then, I don't know. It's just really rigorous. And I do thought that this is a state where people who get Medicaid services are seen as, taking advantage. I mean, the things, and so, I have to pay for that perception And the things that I did yesterday, fill out the form for transportation, fill out the form for respite, fill out the form for supplies, fill out and, it's to always verify that I'm not taking money from the state. So it's draining. But I'm seeking to reclaim those self-care practices, and what do I do to get my equilibrium and my resilience back?
Do you have an answer?
Amen. The to yeah to I mean, not to get too far afield of the question, which I'll come back to in a second, but just to say a system that places a burden upon the folks who are least able to complete that burden, and or the folks around them who are then double dutying, right? We talk about adult caregivers of other adults, parents that are living longer, and the burden that that holds. And there's going to be an increasing number of us who are doing that and also still caring for our children and having to fill out the forms in triplicate, right? That all to prove the thing, that one did not have control over in the first place, to your point about having to kind of prove that we're not trying to game the system, as if we could gather ourselves enough energy to start gaming anything, right? So thank you for bringing that up. I think it's so important. And I'll just say very basically to the question itself about practices during the early days, we have our one son that we were fortunate enough to adopt at birth, and started to see, really, our pediatrician really started to see signs of sort of variation off the average that we weren't aware of because we only had the one child. I was adopted. My brother was adopted, right? So we didn't have a lot of like pregnancy and early childhood in my house to even grow up around and to have a comparison for. So our pediatrician started seeing those signs. But as it turned out, even though we were fortunate to have an astute care provider who clued us in and got us involved with systems, just the way timing worked out was I had just had my second hernia surgery. I began my internship and residency and chaplaincy full time, literally 2 weeks after I had had the hernia surgery. My wife got a phone call at work letting her know about the diagnosis that she didn't even know that she was being considered for, which was MS. And then we had Rowan's autism diagnosis confirmed 3 weeks after that. I say all of that to say that for me, the best self-care practice during that time was we had a really good TAIS caseworker who was really a keen-eyed, eagle-eyed on our situation and started giving us those early affirmations that it was okay to miss a thing because there was so many different pieces moving at the same time. So that type of support and affirmation just at that particular juncture was really good. And then I have to say, for me, going through chaplaincy training at that time really helped because it allowed a key component of that training is recognizing in the moment when an emotion comes up, when a feeling comes up, to question oneself about what the utility of that emotion would be if sort of put into the space between you and the other person of facilitating or shutting down the relationship that you're trying to build. And for somebody who I was needing to learn how to parent in a way that was different than the ways that I may have to the point that was made by our dear virtual friend this evening, right? that getting trained in a process that had me go, wait a second, this food fight that we're having where I'm telling our son, no, you really have to eat this. And I was just getting so worked up about it. And then having something that checked me in that process to say, wait a second, who is this? Is this my thing or is this his thing? Right. And it's so, and my wife was really good at reinforcing that point too. Like, he'll eat when he's hungry, right? And he'll be able to not just survive, but thrive. But what's not helping his thriving is continuing to have these like pitch battles at the table over food. So just having those checks that allowed me to sort of see where my stuff needed to stop so that we could make the appropriate amount of room for him and what he needed was really helpful. And I think, and I'll just add, one of the greatest gifts of being the parent of a child who's differently able, who has different needs, because it helps one see what is the child's and what is one's own in a way that would be really hard to come by, I think, if parenting a more typically developing child.
Can I add one more thing to this? Because I was making some notes here. And I kind of joked that nothing was helpful in the early stages, but you sort of brought this up to me. You know, the early stages for me, with both my children being diagnosed, and my daughter not being diagnosed till she was in her early teens, was the early days I was in survival mode. And I think we all go through that. And so self-care looked very different. It meant telling dad to go take care of dinner. It meant we're having McDonald's for dinner instead of me cooking a meal. And it doesn't look like it was not capable of looking like yoga or quilting, which is what I now do. So it was very survival mode and allowing myself just sort of some grace through those periods. Whereas now that my children are a little older and we can access some of these supports, it's much more intentional. So I don't go to yoga, but I do so for some minutes every day, which is my therapy.
Yeah, one of the most pivotal things for me, someone said to me somewhere along the way, he's not giving you a hard time, he's having a hard time. And for me, that was such a pivotal shift to the point that I typed it up on a piece of paper and taped it to a wall in our house. And it just like, that was my moment of like recenter every time. Anyway, okay, next question. What strategies or resources have you found to be the most valuable in managing stress and staying resilient, especially during challenging times? Lisa, do you mind going first with this one?
Like I said, I do cheap meditation and that's CHEAT and cheap too, because I don't go to a class and yoga. You know, my body knows to get into position and, you know, and leave my body just, you know, to just be quiet and settle in. And I can tell when I don't do it. It's like an exercise. So yes, I think meditation for me and making sure I get outside. It's like the trees absorb my worries. Seldom do I get outside that I'm not changed, you know, especially when I immerse myself in true nature, not just the trees that surround the houses in my neighborhood, but that's better than nothing. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. So I will say for me that it's important that I connect with other parents who are going through the same thing. But what's been really helpful is having a group of friends who have no children with disabilities. So I have a quilting guild. None of them have kids on the spectrum. Most of them are grandmothers, in fact. And so it's a lovely thing that we do once a month, and I never, ever miss that. because it gives me a break, particularly because professionally I'm working in disabilities as well. And so disability can't be the only thing that's happening in your life. And so I think that's very important, is to have both friends that you can, get in the well with you and sort of hug each other and get each other out, but also friends who give you that break from the stress of the day outside of disability.
Did you have a response?
Yeah, just before we get to mine will be very short. I have no answer to this question. The, Lord only knows. Much to the rest of my family's chagrin, I do a few things. So my days feel full up to the margins and pouring past the margins. And again, not to bring up broader issues, that has not lessened over the last few days or weeks. And as a matter of fact, it's only intensified over the last few days. I think that for a variety of reasons, we do have a reason to be concerned that the supports that even allow us to have the room that we have are going to be challenged in a variety of ways or face headwinds, financial and otherwise, that make the types of things that we've been talking about harder. And then on top of that, I will just say that folks of any type of lived difference in the world are in a moment where the existential questions are foremost, either for themselves or for the folks around them. It's been a week, y'all. I held it together for Trans Day of Remembrance and Resilience yesterday. But to have constant conversations, whether it's about our child and his needs, for my spouse and her needs, for me and my safety, for some combination of those things, to ask constantly as a real live question, where do we go to find home? Where do we go to find safety? It is hard to know how to answer a question like this well, because everything feels filled with just trying to solve the existential questions of how do we live into tomorrow. And not to be Debbie Downer, but that's where I am right now, I'm sorry to say.
We appreciate the transparency. Dave, do you want to tackle this question?
Yeah, we've been kind of dancing around this earlier, and what you last said at the last bit, I think was very apropos. It's hard to be a rock in your child's life if you're like stressed out or overworked or anxious, or just like you're burning the candle at both ends and stuff. Our kids can pick up on more than we sometimes give them credit for. I mean, they may not always be able to read a situation to know when it's appropriate to hug someone or when it's appropriate to respond, but they can pick up when I mean, we all can. We've all been interacted with loved ones and stuff on a day that they're stressed out or they're not having a good day or something, and they're terse and their answers are short and it's a bit combative and stuff. Like, we can all kind of, at some level or another, pick up on that vibe. And so if you're trying to help a child who's already like overwhelmed by the world and struggles and challenges, like, you don't want to be another contributing factor to that. So I think it's critical that we try to find our happy place and center, or at least find a good way to effectively fake that when not just interacting with our kids, but even just being around them, right? If they're sitting in the living room playing with blocks and we're working on the computer or something, I think they can pick up on if we're really stressing out or freaking out about things, and overworked. So I've always thought a work-life balance was it's absolutely essential for me. I have such a bad habit of, I can get so hyper-focused on work to where I just work all the time. until I completely burn myself out. And then I'm a waste of human skin who's incapable of anything. So I learned a long time ago, like I've got to find a balance. And it's almost like a religion for me that there are certain things I do at certain times, specifically to blow off steam, specifically to change a venue, to be thinking about something else entirely. I love going out on walks in nature. I love walking like for a few miles, like pushing myself as hard as I can to get my heart rate up and get my cardiovascular system working. Sometimes when I, you know, especially like I won't do it much in the winter because I don't like the cold weather and stuff. And come spring, my first couple of walks, I'm gonna have like chicken legs. I'm gonna be like going a quarter mile and then because I'll be like all out of shape, but I'll keep pushing through it because if I keep doing that in a few weeks, I'll be able to walk 3 miles like it's nothing. And that feeling of accomplishment and that I almost feel like I reset my brain on that. When I get back home and I step back in and sit down and relax, it's almost like I've changed venues or I've changed worlds or I've reset the clock and stuff. And then I'm more resilient and I'm able to handle more things. So that's important to me. I don't get much socializing outside of professional functions and stuff. Part of that is my autism and my social disability. But like all human beings, I need socializing. It's a critical component. You've got to feel like you've got a few people out there who understand you, who get you, who you're able to turn to and rely on when you need that sympathetic ear or you need that shoulder to lean on. We all need that. That's absolutely critical. I'm incapable of just hanging around with people and talking about nothing. I've got to be working on something. I've got to be doing something. You know, this is just one of the flaws of my brain that I just have to deal with. So gaming for me is very important. And you know, being able to hang out with my friends and game together and talk about the game and talk about past games and talk about future games and stuff. Like most of my 95% of my socialization happens twice a month, every other Saturday when my friends come over and we spend the day gaming and stuff. And I can track my stress levels and see how they just sort of like reset after that time and then they build up the next 2 weeks and kind of reset again. So knowing about your limits and trying to actively find ways to maintain that healthy balance, I think is even more critical when you have another human being who's relying on you to get them through the world and get them out safe.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate hearing all the grace and space you guys are creating for yourselves right now. The next question that we have is a two-part question. And it is, how do you balance advocating for your loved one's needs with maintaining your own well-being? And then the second part is, what tips would you share to avoid burnout? Dave, do you mind tackling this one first?
Well, I'm typing them down now so I don't forget them. How do you balance advocating your kids' needs while balancing your own? And what was the second one?
What tips would you share for avoiding burnout?
So I'm very fortunate in the way in the fact that I'm autistic and all of my kids are autistic. And in a weird sort of way that makes some of this a lot easier. Um, you know, because I basically interact and deal with my kids the way I wish people had interacted and dealt with me when I was growing up. And in some ways that made things a lot easier. And in some ways, I think my kids are grateful that they have a parent who really gets them, who's really compassionate and empathetic and understanding of their challenges and struggles and stuff. I I know that that means the world to them because they tell me that all the time. So in a lot of ways, you know, I've been very fortunate about not being in a situation where I have to choose an either or situation of advocating for my kids or balancing my own needs. I'm very fortunate that I haven't really been in that sort of situation. So I can't speak much to that. But burnout, oh, burnout and I are good friends. And I feel like I just kind of talked about that just in my last talk and stuff. Like all of that I just said absolutely kind of applies uh, to burnout. And I don't mean to keep harping on the grace thing, but it really is important that we recognize that we're flawed, imperfect human beings and we're not always going to crush it. We're not always going to win. And sometimes we're going to make mistakes. And sometimes we're going to do something that the next day we're like, oh, what on earth was I thinking? Did I leave my brain at home? What was going on there and stuff? Like, yeah, you absolutely have to give yourself grace and go, you know, I'm trying to do the best I can with what I've got. That's all anybody could ever ask of me. I should never ask more than that of myself. I will try to learn from this and grow and do better. And you keep trying. It's an iterative process. And I find that philosophy is what got me where I'm at today, and that's where I got my kids at today. You know, I have 3 kids. I have 2 that were. I have one that was ASD level 1, and I have 2 that were ASD level 2, and they still have challenges. They still have difficulties. They're still struggling today. But you know, my youngest is a senior studying to be a physicist, and she's at a point now where she's crushing it in college, and she's already set up to go to grad school next year. My son, ASD level 2, didn't start talking until he was about 5. Um, you know, he had significant struggles and challenges in school. He's now in the Air Force as an aircraft electrician, working on the stealth bombers and stuff. And he's been doing that job for a few years now. And my oldest is the one who has the greatest struggles, but she's successfully adulting. I mean, she's not crushing it. She's not doing awesome things, but you know, she's living with her boyfriend as an adult in Arkansas. She has a job. She's paying her bills. She's finding her own work-life balance and stuff. She's finding the little victories in her life to celebrate. She's growing and learning as a person. I'm very, very fortunate that my kids are where they're at today. And
Yeah.
I feel like part of that, a big part of that was being mindful about burnout and being mindful about things and learning and making it an iterative process. I don't think I would have gotten where I was at today if I didn't engage that philosophy.
Well, we discussed and we decided she is crushing it. She definitely is. Darren, do you mind tackling this question?
Sorry, I feel like you keep on getting passed over when we pass the mic like this. I show my age if I see pass the doogie on the left-hand side. Good. I'm in good company then. A lot of folks in the room got that at the same time. Well, I feel like it's only fair that I balance my existential crisis of the last question with something a little bit more life affirming, but it actually goes very well. It's something I've been thinking about this whole evening, and goes well to this question of how do you balance advocating for your child's needs while maintaining your own well-being. And I just want to say that it is going back to what I said about learning what's mine and what is my child and where the bounds of those things are. The continuation of that is as I continued to advocate, as Kate and I continued, my spouse and I continued to advocate for Rowan's needs, what that also helped me realize over time, in part, was that one of the next parenting things I needed to do beyond sort of giving the didactic parental lesson, like, you know, this is the way you're good in the world or whatever, was just simply to model that behavior, to model that sense of self that would allow him to advocate for himself when we are not going. You talked about being the last third of your life. There's going to be a point where we're not going to be able to be the same type of advocates for our children or loved ones in the way that we are now. And so I started thinking about what it is to help him see what it is to advocate for oneself. And it was through that process of realizing that I realized that I wasn't showing up for myself and that I wasn't advocating for who I am, who I've always been. And that part of, despite all cultural rumors to the contrary, part of being the best parent that I could and for my autistic son to demonstrate an adulting tool of advocating for one's own needs and one's own unique self in the world was start showing up for myself and my unique self in the world. And so I credit being the parent of a lovely, loving, and lovable child like Rowan to allowing me to see the ways that I wasn't showing up for myself. And that in the end has done immense things for my well-being. Despite all the cultural stressors that I mentioned in my previous answer, I'm still able to have the resources for that because I'm no longer spending 10,000 watts of energy every moment, every day, trying to be something other than myself. And again, that's the lesson that I want to impart to my child is you've got to show up for yourself, and you've got to show up for yourself so that other people know how they can show up for you. So I still don't have an answer for avoiding burnout. That's the train has long left the station. The horses have left the barn, whatever other images and metaphors we need there. But as far as advocating for our child's needs and maintaining my own well-being, I would say that it is because of advocating for my child's needs that I was able to find my own path to well-being and model that at the same time for him.
There's so much wisdom in what you just said, and I can kind of take it, and these are some of my same thoughts, but it channeled in my own experience. You know, I'm now, like I said, trying to draw back, re-summon who was that person that, wrote and talked and lived about joy and resilience, and, bring these things back and bring these practices back to me, to get on a more even keel. Grace graduated from the extended school system at age 22, and she was the first person to leave vocational rehabilitation and go into the ECF system. And they had not built a bridge to do what they said they would do. And that would be, to have this job coach. And so I spent an inordinate amount of time for the first year and two just trying to get the Rockies, get the rocks out of the pavement and get more smooth sailing. And it sailed along fine for 5 years. And I had so many complications, three major things go wrong. And I was trying to fight to save her job, fight to, there was just all kinds of things going wrong. So, I mean, I just burn out because of the fight. But what I'm realizing now, and, you touched on this, I'm having to show up differently because I'm at a different stage in my life. Like, I have not had it within me to follow up with a legislator to go to TNCare about a matter because I've still got this other stuff. I'm just going to have to let it go, and before I would fight that fight for me and I'd fight it for other people, but it's just, maintaining me, that own self-care to keep this program going for my daughter. And, I also have several times tonight have thought about this. One is that our children, for me, my daughter is my best teacher. And also there's a saying which would be anger inducing for some people, but my belief, my greater spiritual belief, nothing happens to me, everything happens for me. And what we're, at least in your and my experience, our children are teaching us. And I'm finding that through recent experiences just this fall, again and again and again. I got to release control, surrender, and trust the process, because I do believe things work out. And I'm here in life school to learn these lessons. But again, these aren't popular things that people, a victim-minded culture, wants to hear.
I don't know that I really have anything to add, except to say that I don't think you can avoid burnout. I think what you have to learn to do is to give yourself a break, know when you're approaching that, and stop. And one of the best books I ever read, the title of which eludes me right now, is Learning How to Say No. And that's not just to other people when they ask you to do something, but it really sort of points to, what's the priority. But I don't have any sense of balancing the advocacy piece. I am his voice. I am her voice. Now she's learned to self-advocate, so that's beautiful. But for my son with Down syndrome, he's learning, but it's going to be a long way, and I'm always going to be his voice. So there's not really there's not a maintaining of balance there or an avoidance of burnout.
Okay, there's a lot of wisdom in the perspectives that you guys have shared.
Mhm.
All right, next question. How do you make connections with community members or other caregivers when you're just too tired? Want to take that one first?
I am always too tired. How do you do it? You know, I do it when I'm at 3 o'clock in the morning. So I am postmenopausal, and so I don't sleep well. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, that's when I'm having my coffee in my quiet moment. Nobody else is awake, hopefully. And so I'm doing that, you know, through social media, frankly. And I'm also doing it just when I pick up the phone to talk to somebody else. I just find those little nuggets. I'm always too tired, frankly. So I'm just looking for where the good laughs are. Somebody that I can just smile with, and somebody that makes me feel good. You all know somebody who you just love to be around. You may not have anything in common with them, but they always make you feel great. I guess that was like a Robin Williams kind of person. You just find those people and keep them. And I check in with those people and I prioritize them.
I do want to clarify something I said, because you were talking about you'll always be an advocate. I mean, everything I'm doing is advocating, and I'm looking at that future trajectory of when I'm not going to be here. And I'm doing because I ask myself, you know, why am I doing all this? Well, you know, the trajectory for someone like Grace would be to develop mental illness, you know, mental health issues if she wasn't engaged, and I'm helping her live a full life. It's just I'm not taking it to the extremes as I used to change the system or to advocate within the system. But to answer the question, I find that I do a lot of FaceTimes now. I've got two friends, one I hadn't spoke to in 25 years that I've just recently, and she's not a mother of a child with a disability, and neither is my other friend that will get together and have FaceTime. You know, I'm feeling a greater need right now, and I think you alluded to this, for community. And I think that's the task right now, is to, how do we take care of ourselves, you know, regardless of how you view the election. There's someone who has said, Elon Musk, be prepared for hardship. And some of us see that hardship coming and believe what has been predicted. And so how do we survive, you know, things being different as they may be, or regardless, we need those communities. So I'm looking around, how do I create a greater sense of community? I think the pandemic broke down a lot of that for me. And I'm also, John Schaus, who some of you may know, is a pillar in the autism and disability community, said to me sometime in the last year how fortunate we were, because we were around when Autism Tennessee was Autism Society of Middle Tennessee, and restarted from a couple of false tries, or, you know, broken down tries to be an organization, I guess, in the 80s. From 1996 to, I was very active to 2013. And it just, it was pre-internet. And we would get together, we would have large crowds of people, we would have social groups. We had really strong community. And I was talking to somebody yesterday, the Arts and Business Council, and about their programs. And, you know, people don't come to things anymore. And I know I don't really want to get out and drive at night, but, you know, we were just talking about how it's virtual. And so we've lost that community. But I think, you know, now it's time to really maybe build some of that back up, however it looks, you know, just to buoy ourselves, BOUY.
I think that for me, it's being willing to raise the the questions out of a variety of aspects of myself or variety of different selves, parent, trans person, in a variety of different contexts, to assume that there are going to be intersections, even when the room may be convened, virtual or otherwise, for a specific purpose. I'm very conscious in this moment that, especially out of coming out of last night, we had just under 400 folks for the Trans Day of Remembrance and Resilience ceremony. I don't think I need to recite in this room that there are a higher number of, to use shorthand, queer folks who are somewhere on the neurodiverse spectrum that are also would identify as queer, that would often understand themselves as part of the gender expansive or trans community. And so being willing to have those conversations across those variety of lines in a variety of different spaces. I mean, this is going to sound so basic, but you know, there's been conversations in research ethics circles about how you recruit folks in and how you help folks feel reassured. Don't assume that you only have to talk about it in research circles, right? I mean, there's plenty of times where I get jazzed up and I talk to folks about this cool project as a community member I got to read about or learn about, and ended up having conversations that I did not expect to have and find life and connection with others that I might not have had any other way of knowing, had not been to an Autism Tennessee meeting or to a Middle Tennessee Trans Alliance or Tennessee Equality Project meeting or whatever those spaces are, because I was thinking in the mode of that space. But to think that we encounter folks with whom our circles overlap, our experiences overlap in a variety of ways. And so, you know, not to be sort of that we don't hog the conversation, but not to presume that any one subject or not couldn't possibly be part of the conversation, has allowed me to find connections and hear about other people's experience and find resource and new energy in places, you know, the line at Kroger or whatever, in ways that I had no expectations, so that you end up making the instant community while you're waiting in line. That to me is so life affirming, because you're like, oh my gosh, there's other folks along this journey too. And you see them every place, not just in Autism Tennessee Zoom rooms, but they're everywhere.
Okay, next question. Are we doing? Oh, Dave, I'm so sorry, Dave. Tackle this one. Do you want me to read it again, or did you
I
type
was
it
gonna
out?
let you pass me by, but yeah,
No, I'm so sorry.
I want to give a shout out to Sam for sending me the questions. Thank you so much. This is so much easier when I have the questions. So how do you make connections with community members or other caregivers when you're just too tired? You know, one of the things I always try to keep my eye on the prize. You know, I'm trying to be there for my kids. I'm trying to be an ally for my kids. I'm trying to be a supporter for my kids. There are times when I'm all they have and they rely on me, and that's a big response. Even as adults, that's kind of like a big responsibility. So I'm always trying to keep in mind that I got to take care of myself to be in the best position to be able to take care of my kids. And so making connections with community, you know, just aside from the fact that we're social creatures, we're part of a herd species. So it's important that we have communities, and it's important that we have connections to them. That's important enough. But we also need allies. We need allies in you know, our struggles and stuff. We need empathetic and sympathetic shoulders to cry on and stuff. So if I get too tired and I start turtling up and becoming antisocial, I try to remember that this is a priority. I can't let this slide too much. Like, I need to make an effort. So even when I'm tired, even when I don't feel like it, maybe not right now in the moment, maybe I'll try to set up something for Sunday, or maybe I'll try to set up something for some week. You know, sometimes in the moment you can't really deal with that. Again, giving yourself a little bit of grace. But the longer I go, feeling just too tired and not connecting and not maintaining those connections, the more I start to try to remind myself of that, to try to break myself out of that funk and kind of get into it. And just to touch on what we were talking about earlier about burnout, one of the elephant in the room that I left off was humor. Humor is such a crucial part of my life. It's such a crucial part of my kids' life. I I owe the world to Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert for taking situations where I'm feeling awful and terrible and hopeless and finding the ridiculous part of it so I could have a good belly laugh about how ridiculous some things of the are. That's always been like a coping mechanism. That's been a big coping mechanism in our family. That's a big point of connection between me and my kids. Each of my kids have slightly different senses of humor from each other, but some of their senses of humor share in common with my own sense of humor. And there are some months that the only communication that happens between me and my son is he'll send me a meme and I'll have a big belly laugh. And then he sends me a smiling emoji back. And we've had a connection there. We've shared a moment and stuff. That happens with all of my kids, where sometimes we're not even talking. It's just like we're just sharing a moment where we're delighting that we both find humor in this and we're both getting a good laugh out of that. I think that's really my dirty secret to maintaining my sanity and keeping a positive attitude is I try to search for ways to laugh about things and search for ways to set myself out of that despair or that stressed out anxiety that's been a game changer for me. So yeah.
I second that.
I know. I also use humor I mean, probably inappropriately and dark sometimes, but I really enjoy humor to get through really hard times, because sometimes you have no choice but to laugh because the situation is just so dire or so frustrating. Or anyway, that is a very normalizing experience for me. So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, now we can move on to the next question, which is, for those who have found their circle of support and ways to make self-care accessible, what is an unexpected delight or celebration that has come up for you? Lisa, do you mind tackling this one first?
Yeah, part of that community, back to the humor thing, is that we used to say you have to laugh or else you'll cry. And, in that community that I talked to you about, people that I'm still friends with, we would say to each other, it's amazing that we found each other. We would not have found each other. We might have gone the last 30 years without ever knowing one another if we hadn't had the bond of our children. And that reminds me, I've had to bat some people away from my Facebook page who came on to argue with me, which I don't, want to conduct my energy that way, and just remind them what is most important here, that you disagree with the perspective that I put on my digital landscape, which is, I don't name call. I don't think it was about book banning. I was just sharing a picture of what had happened in a county nearby. But I said, what's the most important thing here is what we have in common, in the community, over a commonality of our child's disability. So just reminding of that, and then just the delight in having found each other, having this strong community and watching each other's children grow up and knowing the hardships. And it's fascinating now to look back and see where our loved ones are now as adults and how they've turned out. So, Darren, do you want to?
I'll have a series of just sort of pithy comments. First, to unexpected delights and celebrations, CF, my answer to the previous question about those unexpected moments in the grocery store line. Second, I've often joked that the autobiography, or the biography of me by Rudyard Kipling, is The Elephant's Child, which had insatiable curiosity, right? And that's how the elephant's child got its nose. There is delight in being infinitely curious about others, infinitely, and I should add, genuinely curious, not in a sort of sightseer or spectator way, but to really ask in ways and to be curious in ways that demonstrate one's real desire to kind of cross the breach of ourselves, I think that offers delight in a way. To have go back to the humor point, a court jester's willingness to hear humor or comedy, and this almost comedy in the old school sense, right? Of how am I hearing heroes overcoming obstacles, even this awkward, ungainly moment? Sort of that's the sort of core definition of comedy, is heroes overcoming obstacles. And as well as the court jester's other secret power, being able to speak truth to power in ways that a lot of other folks can't. So that's empowering and humor finding at the same time. And last but not least, this goes back a step, but it feels important here as well. Dave was talking about how being intentional about sort of pushing through to make that engagement or whatever, that in finding delight in maintaining connections with community, in forming chosen family, or our, keeping ties with our families of origin, I'm a big believer that all of that is a verb. To community is a verb. To family is a verb. And it takes intentionality and it takes work, to his point, to really exercise that at times, sometimes when we are too tired. Well, if we go to the gym, we go to the gym sometimes when we're too tired, because we know going there will help us get stronger in that certain thing that we're trying to get better at. Dave, you used the example of doing the half mile that becomes the mile that becomes 2 and then 3 miles as well. That is the same for community, and is the same for how we find delight, and is the same for how we discover humor. Is how do we go about practicing those things? How do we practice humor finding, delight discovering, communitying, familying? I really, the activity of those requires us to attend to them in some action-oriented, intentional ways.
Oh, is it my turn? So I think the only thing that I can really add here is that it was unexpected, really, that I would enjoy sewing as much as I do, and that doing that with other people, it's as much about eating and talking, and it's as much about therapy as it is sewing. But sort of the surprise was that I learned, partly because I'm also caregiving for my father who has Alzheimer's and dementia, is that I'm learning new things every time we're together. So we're together and I go, oh, what are you making? Oh, how did you do? Well, I didn't do that. And so there's that learning process. And so the delight is that I am actually staving off the inevitable dementia and Alzheimer's that's likely to come if I live long enough. So just a little bit of humor.
We'll take it.
We appreciate it. It's valued in this space.
Remember when I realized,
All right, this is our last question. Wait, did I skip you again?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You can go first for the last question to make it up to you.
Okay. Well, for question 6, it wasn't until my car sales years, and by the way, I became a car salesman because at that point in time, I'd been a journalist for 7 years. I'd worked in the professional world long enough to know I got some serious problems. Like in workplaces, I couldn't understand how or why, but I would seem to like make everybody else angry at me, and they would go on witch hunts and they would try to get me in trouble, and they were always like, it always felt like everyone was angry at me, and I got into car sales in an effort to understand people and understand how to interact with them in a way to have some conflict resolution. My thought was, people are always complaining about car salesmen, so here's this stranger that they hate, that they don't even know. And if that person does their job right, within a few hours, they're smiling, shaking their hands, and giving them tens of thousands of dollars. I was like, if I could figure out that, I could figure out how to be left alone at work, because I just want to go to work, get my job, get my paycheck, go home and have a life. I just want everybody else there to just leave me alone and not be trying to sabotage me or ruin. That was my goal. I wasn't looking to make friends. I already had 3 friends, and that was a lot of work. I didn't really need more friends than that. So my social life was already full. So in the 2 years I worked in truck sales and stuff, I did kind of understand how to interact with people in a way that could have some conflict resolution. So I started to get better at interaction. So in the work environment, then a really surprising thing for me happened is I could get people to like me. I could get people to think of me as a good member of the team and be grateful that I was there, and then form these sort of like professional friendships. And then I was surprised to discover that these people could help me with things that I couldn't do myself. If we're on a good speaking basis and I go to you and go, I'm struggling with this, and you go, oh, you just need to use this form and stuff. I was like, oh, that's actually really helpful. It's actually really helpful to maintain a positive social relationship with your coworkers and stuff. And I was also delighted to be able to help them when they needed help in something that I was uniquely kind of suited for. And so that really taught me the value of having allies, having a group of people that you can go to, your circles of support. That made self-care a lot more accessible and a lot easier for me. And for the unexpected delight and celebration is I did not appreciate or understand how fun and engaging it actually is to have those relationships and to maintain those relationships. Every day they're surprising me, even to this day. Like I did this a long time ago, so like I have a lot of professional relationships and stuff in my work at the Frisch Center and at Vanderbilt University. I still maintain close ties with the physics community. I still like to keep my toe dipped in that world as a physicist. I work with the engineering community. I work with the self-advocacy communities. I work with the experts who are like studying this and stuff. So I have a lot of communities that I'm kind of plugged in with. And it's like almost every day, every interaction, there's a delightful moment where someone will share a story or something, and suddenly I have an epiphany and I have like a new way of thinking about this, or a new strategy that I can try, or I'm able to share something about my own story and stuff. And it seems like that's like really helpful for people. That is just that's just like so important. I can't imagine my life now without that. Like I wouldn't be where I'm at today without that. So I'm keenly aware of how important those circles of support are, and how much I'm able to accomplish with that support. So it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy for me to maintain that because it's like literally life and death for me.
That was a great answer. Okay, now we're on to our very last question, and I'm going to let Dave go first to make it up to him for skipping him. All right. What is a piece of advice you would offer to new parents navigating this topic of self-care and support for the first time?
You don't have to do it alone. Please don't try to do it alone. Like if you have no choice, you got to do what you can, but there are other people in the community, people who could be really empathetic and understanding, people who have been there, or people who are walking that journey now or have walked it in the past. Find those communities, plug into those communities, talk to those communities. This is one of the things I absolutely love about Autism Tennessee is you guys have so many of those care support groups. Spectrum dads, there's a lot of like spectrum moms kind of thing. There's a lot of support communities out there for moms who are overwhelmed, but I don't know so many that were for dads. I joined Spectrum Dad since the very beginning. Now, by the time I joined it, my kids were kind of grown up. I had pretty much everything on lockdown, so I was by no means panicking or looking for help. I felt like I had a pretty good strategy, but talking to that dad who just found out last week that his 5-year-old son is autistic, and he's just really freaking out and he doesn't know what that means. He doesn't know how he's going to be able to manage that, or like he's been trying to help his kid and he's like all stressed up and twisted around the axle. Getting him in that group of dads who have like been there and we're all like very supporting, and just giving him some assurances and giving him some stories and maybe some hope that, because I think we all go through it. When you get that diagnosis and you hear about how bad it could be, we can't help but look at the worst case scenario and expect that's the future for my child, and then just sort of like kind of despair from that. It's absolutely critical to realize that nobody can really predict what that child's capable of. No one can. Like, give yourself some grace on that. Give some flexibility. Give that child the room to surprise you and delight you. Give them some opportunities to grow. Teach them teach them a little bit about agency and how to engage in expressing their own agency, and then build that up as they get older and stuff. You can never really, if you give your children room to surprise and delight you, they will sooner or later surprise and delight you. And so little bits like that can mean the world of a difference to someone who just found out about that. So I would say, a crucial component of self-care is plugging into some empathetic communities.
Alicia?
Okay, so I have three. The first one is don't sweat the small stuff. Skip therapy when you're sick, as an example. I'm late a lot. My father points that out when I'm late, and I say, get over it. Because that's just the life that we lead with our kids. The second is ask for help. People who care about you will do things, and by and large, they have no idea what to do for you. So, I mean, call and say, I got no dinner. Are you cooking tonight? Things that used to happen in the old days, but people want to help, I have found. But we don't like to ask for help. So do that. And the last thing is really find that person who will just show up for you. Community is great, but when it hits the wall, somebody who will just sense that in your voice or your text and knock on your door and say, I'm here to pick up your kid for an hour. That's huge. And those people exist. You got to find that nugget.
We've talked a lot tonight about, well, of course, the focus has been self-care, but we've talked about like exercise, walks in the woods, meditation, community. But I'm going to throw in about your mental health and what you say to yourself. And you talked a little bit about that. And what I used to tell parents for 10 years, I did an autism orientation with 101, and I did the parent perspective, was that your mind is your best friend or your worst enemy. So be careful what you tell yourself and question it. There's different programs out there. Is it true? Is it really true? Do you know for sure? And that's key for people, especially at the very beginning, when you're making assumptions easily that people are making assumptions about you and your child. I had this little thing that I would go through in my head. They don't know me. They don't know my daughter. They don't know this is autism. I don't care. I was able to, dispel when she had the meltdown, the Walmart story or the Target story or the Kroger, when she had that, just to release the BS that I'm telling myself about that, concentrate on the present moment. And that's where I've had to, I've had to remind myself to live, in these tenuous times leading up to the election, post-election, is present time consciousness. That's just kind of been a mantra. What is true right now? And I've developed kind of this theory early on in my journey with Grace based on some work that I had done before she was born. And that is, I'd have these doors in the sky. I'd imagine a door suspended in the sky, because when you're little, you hear about they're vulnerable to molestation. They're vulnerable to bullying. They're, all the seizures could happen, all these things. So I believe in being prepared. I believe in knowledgeable. I knew parents that weren't prepared, and then maybe something happened and they were like clueless. Be prepared. Don't obsess on it, but but I found that if I open the door to what is going to come or what might come, that I'd get sucked into a vortex, and that wasn't real right in that moment. And so that's where I choose to work and bring myself back. Present time consciousness. What is real right now? And don't let myself get sucked into a vortex of something that doesn't exist yet or may never exist, that friend or worst enemy in your mind.
I really love what everybody's been saying. One of the things that sticks out to me right now, Dave, I think you said nobody knows what that child's path will be. I feel like that really resonates with me, and for me, it echoes, it underscores what I was saying earlier about understanding, doing what one can early to be cognizant of, to reflect on what you are putting on the child, what expectations you are putting on the child, and what is possible for them. And that when one takes one sort of narrowly drawn road with high guardrails on either side, that may feel safe to us, but that also hems a person in, hems that child in to the sort of the path and the experience that you have an expectation for, and to be able to get to a place where we can be open to the delights of our children's own journeys, to discover what their path will be, to discover what they will do that we didn't know that they'd be able to do. Letting go of the expectation of when Rowan would begin to talk or potty train. My God, how amazing those things were when they actually happened, right? And the miracle and blessing and amazing quality of them was intensified because we had stopped trying to have an expectation that they were going to happen or needed to happen by a certain time. And I feel like if I was fortunate to have folks around me early enough that allowed me to start thinking about that process earlier than I might otherwise, but it wouldn't have hurt to start it on that process even sooner. So if I had to give a piece of advice to somebody early on, it would be to just to let that child be their own person, and to revel and delight in what that young person, that constantly becoming person is constantly becoming.
I want to add to that. That brings us back to community, because we used to say that nobody understands the victory in these subtle milestones that other parents take for granted. And that other parent of a loved one with autism, they get it. They know how big it is. You have a community bond and commonality in that victory.
And I just want to add one more thing. When the first panelist went, by the time she was done, I felt bad for the other two panelists because I thought, man, that's a solid answer. That's going to be a tough answer to kind of top. And then the next one crushed it with an amazing answer. And then the next one crushed it with, you guys like knocked that last question out of the ballpark. I got to say, I felt like I was learning from that. Thank you for that. You guys have a lot of wisdom to share.
Amen. And right back at you.
Yeah, so that was our last question. I agree. There's been a lot of wisdom, perspective, and sharing of grace in this conversation. I hope that anybody who's watching this has, identified their opportunities to create their own circle of support, and ways to find resources that they need. And if you are a newly diagnosed parent who is watching this, at any point in time, reach out to Autism Tennessee. And I want to thank all of our panelists for being here tonight and sharing your stories. I know this can be a tough journey to share in a way that holds space and grace for your loved one on the spectrum, while also holding space and grace for you and your journey as a caregiver. Sam, did you want to say anything in closing, or Jessica?
Did we have any questions that came in the chat?
Yeah, so in the very real attitude of this talk, some of our parents from Zoom had to hop off to take care of their loved ones. So
We understand.
imagine. No pressure at all.
Well, and we're right on time too. We were 15 minutes late starting and we're 15 minutes after the original. So we nailed that hour and a half too. Bonus.